Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Michael Brodkorb. Becky Scherr is off on maternity leave, and you're stuck with me solo this week, but I have an amazing guest joining me. Today's guest is someone I've admired for years, not just for his unmatched insight into Minnesota politics, but also how he conducts himself as a commentator, communicator, strategist, and overall human being. Blois Olson is a name known to anyone serious about understanding our state's political and policy landscape. His morning take is essential reading for those of us in the arena, and his voice, whether in writing, on the radio, or behind the scenes, carries weight, not just because it's one of the loudest, but because it's the most consistent, thoughtfully informed, and fair. Professionally, Blois has shaped how we talk about campaigns, crises, and policy, and everything else. I've come to deeply respect him for his generosity, integrity, and his ability to ask the right questions at the right time, and it's an honor to have him on the show today. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the show. Today is a treat on The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. When Becky and I were first talking about doing this podcast, and we were going through the list of people that we wanted to have on, this person was one of the first people that we mentioned. Blois Olson is a name that everyone who is serious about policy, politics, and understanding our state's political landscape and public policy landscape knows. And it's an honor to have him on the podcast today. Blois, it is truly a pleasure to have you on. Everything I just wrote that I'd spent the night before writing and talking about is truly how I feel. I have just, you and I have a history of knowing each other a very long time. And you are truly someone that when Becky and I were first doing this podcast, we were thinking about having you on would be such a great get. And so I'm so appreciative that you made time to come on today.
Michael, I say thank you. We do have a history, and it's a storied one, but it's one of maturity and growth. And I think that's one of the things, no matter where we are in this world, in this arena, in politics today, that I think that it's really important for people to reflect and be mindful of where we've been, where we've come, what our role is in the arena. I think about that a lot, and I make adjustments as I see needed, but I appreciate it, and congrats on building this podcast. You guys have had great guests. I listen regularly, and you guys have brought a fresh perspective to politics with you and Becky's experience.
I appreciate that so much. Tell our listeners, and this is going to be unusual, because nearly everyone who listens to this podcast will know who you are. But for probably maybe some relatives out of state that are listening and some other people, give a little bit of your background as to how you got to where you are in your background in politics, public policy, and where you are today.
Sure. I think it's important to talk about where we come from. I grew up delivering newspapers in a family that had the TV news on every night, and I had an uncle who was a county commissioner, a chair of the county board, and in a family, when we had holidays, I was one of the younger cousins, let's just say, but I had some opinionated cousins, and you had to hold your own on your opinions. And that was my childhood. I thought I'd grow up to be a lawyer. I went to school at Oshkosh. I found journalism. Writing was always a passion or an interest. And frankly, then I fell in love with campaign life into the 90s. I was DFL campaign operative, Democratic operative nationally, worked on a couple presidential races, and then I just really decided I wanted to work in the private sector. I was around a lot of people who were lifers in government. I didn't feel like that was my vibe. I like to be innovative. Some would say a disruptor. And so in 1998, officially left campaign life, started my first firm, which was called New School. Had that for 9 years. At the same time, we started a political website in Minnesota called mnpolitics.com. We merged it with Politics in Minnesota. We sold that in 2007. Sarah Janicek, the late Sarah Janicek, was my partner in that. And then in 2010, I just had this idea on a Sunday for something that resembled Playbook that Politico was doing. And I woke up that morning and sent an email to, 70 to 100 people. And here we are 15 years later with multiple tip sheets and newsletters and a role on CCO that started in 1998, but went full-time or every day. It's not full-time, but every day in 2010. And from there, we've recently split off the consulting side to a firm called Fluence Advisory. The model that I aspire to now is modeled after investment banking. And that may seem weird in the public policy space, but I really believe you have to know and understand an industry to be able to consult in it or cover it. And I think investment bankers, they cover industries, they cover companies, and then they consult on the deal side. And I've imagined this vision where we cover healthcare, we cover agriculture, we cover financial services, hospitality, and then we help those companies or organizations navigate through public policy regulations in those spaces. And I've been re-energized by that model, and hopefully we have hopefully we have another decade in me.
I hope you do. I want to acknowledge something you just said, which is Morning Take, which is a must read for everyone. Just celebrated its 15-year anniversary. So congratulations to you on that and all the support. I assume everyone who listens to this podcast gets the Morning Take, but for those of you who don't, you should. I don't know how you start your day. Many mornings I will have read the Morning Take before I will talk to anyone in my household. And it is a must start. One thing I've always wanted to ask you about the Morning Take is your schedule in preparation for that. It's coming out right away in the morning. What is your lead time in to get content in and into the Morning Take so that email goes out every morning?
It's evolved, Michael. I started it just doing it myself every day. I would get up at 4 a.m. with a blank sheet of paper, and I would try to get it out by 7. As it evolved, as it grew, we launched some other tip sheets that other people would curate. I would edit. I still edit or take a look at every tip sheet before it goes out. But the Morning Take schedule has been modified. I'd say probably for, I don't know, 8 or 9 years. There's a staffer, Kyle Hampel's the current one. He curates it the night before. I get a copy about 8 or 9. I look at it, and I've either sent things throughout the day or I've made mental notes about the buzz of the day. I try to reorder them to do that. And then I get up somewhere between 5 and 5:30 every morning, depending on how confident I am that the newsletter's in good shape or not. And then I rescan everything overnight. And then I try to press send by 7. And I get a little warm up because I do CCO at 6:20 every morning. And that's a good test because it's what do they think the news of the day is versus what do I think the news of the day is, and how do we shape it or how do we lead it? The premise was really simple. The premise was I want to make you smarter before your business breakfast, and that's what drives me. And we want to talk about what's coming more than what just happened, because anybody can say here's just what happened, but if you can give people 2 or 3 days a week, here's what to watch today, or here's where it's going today, that's valuable in our audience's lives. And so that's the goal.
One of the things that I would note in preparation of doing this interview, and I was thinking about how many ways you've had just an impact on things in politics and in public policy and campaign discussions. But one thing that you've fundamentally changed is when we get news breaks. It's very interesting. When I was started out before Morning Take, news would break during the day. And one of the things that you have started now is this: in the Morning Take breaks a ton of news. And so I think one of the coveted spots to be, if you're making an announcement, is you always want to make sure you're in front of the Capitol Press Corps, but getting mentioned in Morning Take and breaking news in Morning Take, that's one of the things that you've established. And it's now a part of kind of the timing of politics in this state is in the morning, what's going to be in Morning Take and what news is going to be broken. That's an impressive feat to basically change everybody's internal clock in this state to now be what's going to be in Morning Take.
And that was part of the whole premise of what's coming.
Yep.
In 2010, if you flash back, it was a very vibrant political year. The governor's race was such. And it was also pre-controlled social for campaigns, pre-content on their own. And the Dayton-Emmer race was such that there were just twists and turns. There were drama moments. There was unexpected things. It was the first big campaign in Minnesota outside Citizens United. So we had external groups trying to figure their way out. I talked to a friend and source this week who worked on the Emmer campaign, and they had used a database service to pull their media list, and they were vetting the media list statewide, their metro list, their capital list, and apparently they showed it to now Congressman Emmer, then State Representative Emmer, and he said, why is Blois not on our media list? And this person was like, he's a Democratic operative. Why would we put him on his media list? And he goes, do you read his email every day? We should make sure he has our news. And the operative wanted to tell me that this week because he just remembers like having to start rethinking things then. And look, it's worked, it's done well, it's been borrowed and taken its own shape, but it really was like, hey, let's tell people what's going to happen today so that they're ready for their day. Or the executive in the business office that says, I'm going to go to breakfast, I better know what's going on today, or maybe I have one little piece of currency. The last little nugget I'll tell you about the beginning was I was at the desk, I had pressed send, and I got this call from a general counsel of a major Minnesota corporation. And he said, hey, I need all the IP addresses by which Morning Take can come from. And I was like, I don't know how to do that, but I'll try to figure it out. I said, why? And he said, because our CEO is ticked it's getting blocked in our spam filter and wants to tell IT to whitelist every single IP address. And I was like, if the CEO of this corporation thinks it matters, then I better get up a little earlier every day.
That's great. That's fantastic. One of the things I want to acknowledge that having had the benefit of knowing you over the years, is how you comment on politics and how your perspective on it. You are someone who has such an even-keeled hand in discussing and knowing how to talk about issues. And why I think that's so important is because our political landscape has changed so much, and it's such a polarizing time right now that there is a need for someone who can talk to both sides, not talk out of both sides of their mouth, but who can communicate effectively. And one of the things I think you've always done a very good job at is finding a way to get Republicans and Democrats to talk. You moderate debates, you host forums, you host discussions, but you and I both are of an age bracket where we were around before the internet, and now we're in this internet climb. And one of the things that I get so challenged by is the hyper-partisan tone of politics and how that can, particularly online, change. What's the shift that you've observed, and how do you approach balancing speaking to a group of people who can be very progressive, very conservative, but then make yourself a credible messenger for what the message that you need to deliver?
You know, Michael, the evolution or the shift for me has not been as intentional as it probably should have been. Look, you and I are both been known to throw a grenade and get people fired up, and sometimes my instincts still go that way. But the energy that took and what it meant to the system and how I wanted to be reflected in the arena was just not a good look. It was kind of like wake up in the morning, look at yourself in the mirror after you said some things and be like, yeah, I don't really like that tone, and I don't think I'm contributing. And so over time, it was really clear that the sides weren't talking to each other. The more we started running in tribes of only people like us or politicians like themselves, that they weren't talking to other people. And I'm just genuinely curious. I love this state. I love Minnesota. I love the Midwest. And I just wanted to know what people were thinking. And there was a moment in 2022 that kind of reinforced what we were doing. Post-pandemic, 2020, all the forums and debates were online on Zoom. And in 2022, we had a group that said, if you were to engage people across Minnesota on an issue, how would you do it? And I said, I'd travel the state, I'd host roundtables and cafes, and we'd have a conversation. And you know what the people we visited said? Thanks for coming to us. It wasn't, oh, these are really important topics. It was, thanks for coming to us. And I've used that as a guiding principle since then is I want to go to where people are, not expect people to come to me. And I think whether it's higher ed or the national media and the coasts or whatever, they like expect people to just come to them and do it their way. But you meet people where they are, you're going to see, you're going to learn, you're going to feel much more about them. The other thing is the more volatile politics got and the more social media added to that volatility, the more I would see a story or an issue develop, and then a day later it would change or there'd be a new angle. And so I remember specifically when President Ilhan Omar was elected to Congress, And there'd be these national voices coming in, and I'd be like, what do Minnesotans think? That's our angle. And how do you look at it? And there was a moment, and I don't remember what the issue was, Michael, but I remember saying, let's watch this and see where this settles out in 18 to 24 hours before I comment, before I tweet, before I do that. And I actually remember the issue that made me think that way was the young men who were in DC on a school field trip. I can't remember the name of the school, but you remember that they got in trouble for accosting
Yes.
a threat or something?
Yes.
And it was a weekend. And I remember we don't have a morning take till Monday. And the evolution of that story between Saturday and Monday was totally different. Remember that the whole picture emerged, not the zoomed in picture.
Correct.
It was banter. And that was a moment where I said, you have to wait till you see the whole picture before you can just start giving a take. And so I've tried to do that. You and I are recording this on a moment, and I have an observation of some dynamics in the Minnesota legislature right now, and I'm connecting the dots, but I'm waiting to see 2 or 3 more proof points before I comment. And I don't think I would have done that 10 years ago. I certainly wouldn't have done it 15 years ago or 20 years ago.
Newspapers are we've seen, particularly locally, the reduction of newspapers issuing editorials in support of candidates and stuff. I'd like to get your take on the role of the media to the degree which you feel comfortable commenting on, particularly when it comes to analysis. I think one of the things that's so important is political analysis. I'm a huge Vikings fan. I know you're a fan of multiple sports, but analysis comes with sports. And analysis, I think, can also come with politics. How do you see the role of analysis in politics changing? Is it getting better? Is it worse? Where is social media changing it? Because I fundamentally believe, just as much as I want to listen to a Vikings postgame, anywhere that I listen to it, I want to listen to political analysis. Is there a crossover? Is there some similarity? What's your take on that?
No, I think that's a parallel that I identify with very well. I think both sports and politics are often overanalyzed, and yet there's still an audience, right? If you think about the democratization of both sports analysis, sports media, and political analysis and political media. Look at The Athletic and what it did for sports coverage. They hired experienced sports reporters who went deep on each team and knew the team and had the sources from traditional media. Here in Minnesota, it was from the Star Tribune or AP. And they built an audience, and they built a new model that people paid for premium content. And they showed that there was an audience that wanted something deeper. And then they sold it to the New York Times, the most traditional media organization ever. Political coverage, similarly. Politicos, first, Axios, others have taught me. And I have a little bit of a inside edge, not any sort of proprietary thing, but Jim Vindehei, the founder of Politico and Axios, is a college classmate of mine. He was the sports editor of the Oshkosh Titan, which I was the editor of, and I paid him $35 a week to be the sports editor. I made $70 a week, just for the record, Michael, which, knowing my eating and drinking habits in college, didn't go very far. But I watched him do it, and he called me right before he left. Think about this. He left the Washington Post as the White House correspondent to start Politico. And he called me as he was doing that. He goes, we're going to do an online-only publication. I know you've done this for a while. What do I need to know? And I said, bold the names and serve appetizers, not Thanksgiving dinners. And he's okay. And I don't want to say they copied things. It's just a friendship. What do you know? What do you think? How you talk about anything? But I think the thing about analysis is, I think when you have smart people who really know what they're talking about, no matter what industry or what sector or sports, it makes you think different and gives you more perspective. And I think that's what politics needs more of. Who the Vikings pick in the 37th round is going to be like, okay, whatever. But there's going to be somebody who cares. And who's running for city council in Pequot Lakes? There's going to be somebody who cares. But too often, I think the shiny objects, the louder voices, the too loud voices, the fringe issues get all the noise, when in reality, there's 90% of public servants that are there. And I think Congress has proved that. I often say there's 20 people in Congress who make 95% of the news. Can we talk about the 95% of Congress who makes no news? I want to know what they think. And I think that's where you analyze where their districts are. In Minnesota, like one of the things that I don't want to say we've had some boring races the last couple cycles. We haven't had 5 congressional races that are there. We haven't had open seats. We have an open Senate seat, an open congressional seat, a governor's race, which is I mildly obsess over, and our readers love because governor's races are different. Like I already know that 2026 is going to have a lot of analysis. Who's with who, who's where, what people are coming out of the woodwork. And it's a midterm of a Trump presidency. This is, I don't know, it's not quite Christmas, but maybe it's Thanksgiving with 2 helpings of dessert.
Or 2 turkeys, because turkey's great.
Turkey is great. We don't have ham on Thanksgiving, Michael.
You might at the Scherr household because Becky's not here to defend.
We're not going to pick on her. She's not here to defend herself.
That's right, exactly. Can I ask you about social media and what's your take on all of the takes on social media? Because one thing that I have noticed, and I will disclose, I follow you on social media, of course. You are one of a handful of accounts that I have notifications always turned on for. So anytime you tweet, I get a message or something about it. How do you balance, first of all, consuming social media, and then how does balancing and engaging on it reflect your takes?
I think first of all, I think the democratization of media through social media is a good thing. I think it adds to transparency. I think it adds to distribution, because if you don't have distribution of information, you really don't have anything. But look, it's part of my mood or what the news of the day is. I remember when I joined Twitter during the RNC being hosted in St. Paul, Minnesota, because you could follow live streams of protesters and news there more effectively than you could on actual traditional news.
Correct.
And I was doing some advising on things for the city of St. Paul, and I was like, hey, this is what this looks like. I then think of other major news incidents, from police shootings to George Floyd protests, etc. And like breaking news, there's news coming, there's information being distributed through Twitter or X specifically. But I will say this, like the vulgar, disgusting tone, the dismissive tone, depending on what your party politics are, or your perceived politics are, like it means I don't spend as much time there anymore. I use lists a lot. I, like you, try to follow a few people, but no telling somebody else is going to chime in. And then a few years ago, I just decided that a third of my tweets had to either be totally non-political and like nonsense, or just like a random take that maybe I just thought of quickly. And that's how I like to eat and I like food, but like, suddenly my food lists, which all have an angle of ridiculousness on purpose, became the most popular tweets. And I was like, okay, we have to lighten this crowd up. And if I can do that for 20 minutes, a quarter, or a month, I've done something to somebody's mental health. But there's still somebody who goes crazy and is, you had Domino's as a top 10 pizza? And I'm like, mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished. One of the things that I know I've spoken with you about that I hope comes across in the morning take that people should know is I think that you truly care about Minnesota and our civic institutions. I truly believe that you are someone who wants Minnesota to be a good place to live, a good place to grow. And I've seen you speak out on civic responsibility and people being engaged. What's your perspective on our state? I think what I say very frequently is Minnesotans like to think that they have a great government and we're transparent and we're all this stuff and we have the best role in government and we have the best in everything. We don't. There's always rooms for improvement. But I'm talking about like civic engagement, people voting and people believing in the institutions of government. Where's your confidence level in how people are feeling about government, where they're going, and is there going to be opportunities for civic engagement to continue?
there's a lot to unpack there. Let's just talk about civic engagement first. Look, one of the lines I use, because there's not that many original lines, is I talk about turnout modeling and why that's important for us to watch as we anticipate and analyze elections pre and post election. And then I often say, and in Minnesota, we're really good at voting. Just ask us, because we're really good. And I think we are engaged, and voting is like the most basic act that you can do to be engaged. And I think it's really important to encourage. My two kids just became of voting age in a presidential race this past year, and that they grew up around it, and it was like they knew their job. I didn't care who they voted for. I didn't know what they did, but we had modeled that behavior, and it was what it was. But back to your trust in government. This is where I've been for a few years. And I think I'm still here, and I think the examples keep coming. And it's that Minnesota government worked really well for a long time. And it doesn't work as well as it should. And nobody seems to have an urgency to fix it. And I'll give you an example. I think, and I tweeted about getting my tabs at Cub Foods a couple weeks ago, because I'm bad at getting my tabs. I'm bad at planning for it. And I undoubtedly end up in some line for an hour and a half on a day I don't want to be in a line. And I went to Cub Foods and I got tabs in less than 10 minutes. And I paid a 4% convenience fee. Happy to pay that. Time is money in my world. And I'm like, why did it take us so long to do this? People are like, you can order them online if you go to the website. Yeah, I've already established I'm not good at that. Okay. And I need a person, or I need a machine. I was in Boston last year over my birthday weekend. This is a little off topic, but I went to rent a car on the 8th of March. My birthday's on the 9th of March. I was returning the car on the 10th of March. The car place said, you will not have a valid driver's license when you return this car. You can't have a car. And I was like, oh, never thought of that. And they're like, and Minnesota is not a grace period state on driver's licenses. This is the Hertz counter in Boston. And I was like, oh, we have a grace period on tabs of 30 days, but we don't have one on driver's license. Interesting. And the woman at the Hertz counter looked at me and she said, does Minnesota have an app where you can just renew it right now and show it to me? And I was like, yeah, no, we don't have that. She's, oh, because in Massachusetts, you can renew it in an app right now. And that's the way people do things now. And government in Minnesota has not evolved that way fast enough. I also look at results. You and I are both products of Minnesota education. I believe fundamentally that my thinking, my mind, some element of whether I'm successful or not, or know what I'm doing or not, came from my education in Minnesota. And I just want to make sure that we don't go, oh, we're going to the lowest common denominator, or we're going to lower our standards on education in some way, shape, or form. Things are totally different. The dynamics are totally there. But I grew up in an era where we didn't do that. And the last part there is I got to college in my first Poli-Sci 101 class. You're going to appreciate this. After class 2, it was a 3-hour night class on Mondays and Wednesdays. Okay. We did, I think it was the second class. We were comparing French Parliament, English Parliament, and Canadian Parliament. Now that all the listeners have fallen asleep, I raised my hand 4 times and answered the question. And this professor who was from Bulgaria, Professor Riddell, looks at me in this thick European accent and goes, you stay after. And I go up and he goes, where are you from? And I'm like, Minnesota? Where did you go to school? And I go, Mounds View? He's like, how do you know these things? And I'm like, we learned them in high school. He's like, you're clearly not from Wisconsin. Take that, Packer fans. That was and Michael, I just think of that. And I think of it in many categories. And then lastly, look, if we're going to have this civic exceptionalism that we claim, then government has to be more transparent. Leaders of all stripes and parties and positions need to build transparency, because we are in an era of distrust of institutions. And the only way to convince people that the other side is not scheming to end the world, is to be transparent and straightforward.
And we need more of that.
Yeah.
Do you think Democrats and Republicans, and this is a question I'd ask you, we'd mentioned Thanksgiving. One of the challenges is, and this is where I think you would probably excel, is at a Thanksgiving dinner at a family event where there's Democrats and Republicans there. Do Democrats and Republicans communicate enough in this state in ways in which is effective? One of the reasons why I bring that up is because a legislator that I knew a while back always said that when some of the rules were changed about legislators lobbying events and legislators talking together, that really siloed Republicans and Democrats more in this state. Do you think that there is enough face-to-face engagement with partisans in this state? Or is there enough of it? Not enough? Is it productive? What's your take on the state of partisanship in this state?
I don't think they do work well together, or as well as they used to even 10, 15, 20 years ago. But I think there are exceptions. One of the best things, I should have continued it, I started during COVID, was I started in an old podcast called Beers with Blois. I started to have a Republican and a Democrat on who were working on a COVID issue, whether it was hospitality or hospitals or healthcare. And they loved it. And it was brought because I was talking to legislators just about issues, and they'd be like, I'm working with representatives. And then that would not get out there. And then now I think we've even gotten to a place where people refuse to, or they think they're going to get primaried because they work with the other side. One of the stories I heard recently, and I haven't written this story, so here's a little breakdown scoop that will probably come out, is Doran Clark, who ran for the Kerry Dietzig seat and won and is a new state senator, grew up in rural Minnesota. And I learned this because Keith Allen, a freshman state rep, texted me when Doran announced and said, does he have a chance? And I was like, we got to wait and see who's in the race. And it's a DFL seat, so if he gets the endorsement, should be good. And I'm like, why do you care? Why do you, Keith Allen, from farm country in southeastern Minnesota, care about Doran Clark in the Senate seat? It's not going to change the majority in the Senate. And he's, because I grew up with him and went to Sunday school with him.
It's a great story.
And they went to high school together. And one of them's a conservative House Republican, and one of them's a liberal Senate Democrat. And they've done a couple like pictures together. They've talked about authoring some bills together. Like, Michael, you and I know if we did that 40 more times or 20 more times in the legislature, it would be a totally different place. And they're not going to agree on very many things, but the tone and the tenor is going to be different. The other side is socialization. COVID changed the socialization of the legislature. Voting remote, lack of receptions. And then I'll call this out too, that I think is really, like, there are legislators on both sides of the aisle who legit won't meet with somebody they disagree with. Or they're authoring a bill in an interest group on the left or the right wants to meet with them and talk to them about it, and they won't even meet. And then they tell the press when asked, I'm listening. If you won't meet with people, you're clearly not listening. And I think I say this a lot privately, just because they say it does not make it true. And I think that's where the media has, just because of the thinness of the media and some of the changes, needs to do more follow-up questions and really dig in. Not in a gotcha sort of way, but like, really, are you open to listening, or are you just saying you're open to listening? And too often people just say things because it gets them out of the moment.
Look to the future. Where do you think media, politics, and this state is 5 years from now?
That's going to be one of the additions of our new product, the Fluence Brief, in the next 3 weeks. We're still in a really good place in media in Minnesota. We have strong media, Minnesota Public Radio, the Star Tribune, Alpha News, and the Reformer actually add to that. MinPost, the Sahan Journal, the Pioneer Press, and the idea that it's still alive and creates some local news every now and then warms my heart, because that's the newspaper I grew up delivering. Michael, I delivered that mornings and afternoons during the week. There was,
People are going to be Googling that to try to figure out why you were delivering it twice during the day. Yes, you used to get, I remember the newspaper coming twice a day, and Blois was delivering it on some of those days, apparently.
yeah. And by the way, that was the work ethic, right? You had to get up and do it.
You're
And
tougher than I.
that is, people ask me, like, how did you figure this out? I just wired my brain at a young age accidentally to just be doing this. But I would look, I think the media will continue to be democratized. I think there's power, there's new economic models. I will say this, we're never the first to go somewhere, but I watch and see what platform is successful. And Substack, this privately, we converted from email only to Substack with a hub website now. Our readership of our ag products, our health products, went up 500%.
Wow.
So it shows that if you build it, they'll read it and they'll get it. But if you make it hard for them to get, or they think they might not be interested in it, they're not going to go out of their way to get it. And for instance, Substack has created for a lot of folks a new economic model. And I look at it, and the bookkeeper's always like, how do I code this? And I'm like, just another subscription. And I'm like, and college hockey is a passion that I watch. There's a Substacker who writes about college hockey, and he charges $140 a year. If he's going to try to make a run of it, writing about college hockey, I can send him $12 a month or $15 a month and be like, I don't know, that's 6 articles at $3 a piece. It's like a cup of coffee, and it's better for me than coffee. So I think those models will be there. I think we will have one huge network or news organizations have a trust crash in the next 4 to 6 years too. It'll be similar to the altered documents of CBS News, but it'll be worse. It could be a Watergate type moment where the media is too aggressive, or they become, and then all the other media are going to have to change the way they are transparent and report. I also think we're probably going to have the collapse of some part of a state due to financial issues. I think other institutions are going to have major challenges like higher ed. And I think it's going to beg the question, like, how did we not know this? I think one of the examples locally is the Minneapolis public schools. The Minneapolis public schools have shown a massive financial issue for 3 or 4 years. And the Star Tribune covers it like once a month. And we know kids aren't going to school there anymore. And we know they have the same number of teachers with fewer kids. And I think it's those big questions in our time, in our country's history, that it takes I hate to say it, but it takes crises to learn. Think about what we didn't know before 9/11 that we came to expect about security after. And I think we're going to have a couple more of those moments in the next 5 to 10 years.
Blois, you have been so generous with your time today. You are a Minnesota institution at a very early age. You're someone that I tremendously respect, and you have a tremendous amount of influence in the way we view, think, and talk about public policy in this state. It's an absolute treasure and a joy to have you on the podcast. And I hope to have you on again at some point, but just congratulations on the smashing success of Morning Take and disrupting everybody's mornings and making sure that they check their spam filters to get it, but also just your presence and your insight and what you offer. I am in kind of preparation of this. I was thinking about how much of my news comes from some connection that you have, and a lot of it does. And I consider myself to be well-read and informed. You're doing a great job. And so congratulations on your success. I hope there's another 15 years down the road for you, and you're celebrating a 30-year success at some point. But just thank you for taking the time and spending some time on my little podcast.
Michael, thank you. But I think I want to say this out loud, because people who know us and know our history know we started off with a pretty tenuous relationship. And behind the scenes, I consider you one of the best sparring partners when we both have a perspective. And sometimes we go cold on each other for a while, but we find a way back because there's a trust and a friendship and a genuine interest. And I think you and I both know, and we observe young, vibrant, excitable tweeters and posters and crap posters on both sides of the aisle who just think it's easy. And I just want to send a message to them if they ever take the time to listen to two old guys in their 50s about politics. You can change, you can evolve, and life's a lot better when you realize that you just talk about stuff rather than get in a battle. And I had to practice that this week because somebody tried to chirp me. I know you saw it about their name not being in the morning take. And I decided to chirp back a little. And 15 years ago, I probably wouldn't have, but I picked up the phone and just called the person. I'm like, I hope you understand that, like, I don't wake up with any agenda. I just watch what I see. And if you want to be in the newsletter, literally, it's pretty easy. You just call and tell me you're running for Congress, and I'm going to put you in the newsletter. There's no agenda. There's no, right? And these people come up with these conspiracy theories, or that the other side has this conspiracy. And I hope you endorse this statement, Michael. Just know that, like, the human condition does not think like that very often. And when you find yourself thinking like that, go talk to some normal people who aren't in the political bubble, because you'll learn really quickly they are putting their kids through sports and school, and they're going to church, and they're just trying to make a living. They're not out here throwing grenades on X or wherever. And that's what I appreciate about you, Michael. I appreciate and I learn from you as well. And I think the more you and I can do to help others understand that just because you might spar and poke and say some fun things to each other, at the end of the day, it's like a sporting event, Michael. If you can't shake hands at the end of the day, you have no business in this business.
Said, my friend, thank you for your leadership, all you do, your voice, your perspective, and thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye. I want to thank you for listening to this episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before you go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or the platform where you listen. You can also follow us across all social media platforms and our website at BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will return next week. Thank you so much for joining us today.